Get started. Good to see you all here this morning. So, in 1957, a 16-year-old John Lennon formed a little band called the Quarrymen with a bunch of Liverpool kids that you've probably never heard of. And then a little later that year, Paul McCartney and George Harrison joined the band in 1958, I guess. And after several name changes, including stints as Johnny and the Moondogs and the Silver Beatles, they settled on the Beatles with an A and became one of a handful of struggling, kind of semi-professional local bands playing small gigs around Liverpool, and then eventually Hamburg, Germany. And in Hamburg's nightclub scene, they played these marathon gigs, sometimes playing for as many as 8 hours long. So they had to learn a lot of songs and how to work a crowd, and soon became known for their stage presence. Leather jackets, slicked back hair, and kind of this raw, very youthful energy. And by the time they returned to Liverpool in 1960, they became local stars, playing at this little place called the Cavern Club. Anybody ever visited the Cavern Club? I always want to. It was just this little basement dive where they played nearly 300 shows. And on November 9 of 1961, the band was playing a lunchtime show, and a local music shop manager, a guy named Brian Epstein, came to see him play, and he was impressed by them. Just their energy and charisma, this natural stage presence, despite a few rough edges. And Epstein would later on say, "I was immediately struck by their music, their beat, and their sense of humor on stage. And even afterwards, when I met them, I was struck again by their personal charm." And it was there that really it all started for us. Epstein had no experience with this kind of thing, but he offered to become their manager and convinced them to exchange their leather jackets for suits and ties and to set their sights on a record deal. And so on January 1 of 1962, so that's New Year's Day, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Pete Best, the drummer before Ringo, traveled to London through the freezing rain to play an audition for Decca Records. Epstein had arranged this through a man named Dick Rowe, who was the head of A&R at Decca. Although it was a guy named Mike Smith, sort of a junior level talent scout, who oversaw the actual audition. The band set up their gear in the studio, and engineers mic'd them up, and they recorded 15 songs in about an hour in Decca's London studios. And the set list, it was a bunch of kind of rock and roll standards by folks like Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly, and then a few original songs. But unfortunately, the band was nervous, and their performance was not very good. And Decca execs listened to the tapes for a few weeks, and then Dick Rowe called the Beatles manager and told him that Decca Records had decided to pass on signing the Beatles to a record contract. The reason that he actually gave them, they say, was that guitar groups are on the way out. That's what he told them. Swing and a miss there. Oh, John Lennon, in his blunt style, would later say, "I wouldn't have signed us either. We sounded like crap that day." Decca did let Epstein have the tapes, the audition tapes, and he began shopping them around to other labels, and as fate would have it, one of the people he reached out to was a guy named George Martin, a producer at EMI's Parlophone label. And Martin listened to the tapes and wasn't impressed either. And then he hung out with the band and was totally charmed by them. He just loved their personalities and their sense of humor. And so in June of 1962, the Beatles signed with EMI, and the rest is history. George Martin went on to be known as the fifth Beatle. He produced every album except for one. And for the rest of his life, though, Dick Rowe would be known as the man who passed on the Beatles, which is a tough one to live with. Although he insisted he didn't make the final call. He swears he let Mike Smith choose between the Beatles and another London band called Brian Poole and the Tremolos. Anybody heard of them? Yeah. He chose the Tremolos because they were local and it was cheaper. Although it is kind of an interesting coda to this story that the next year, 1963, George Harrison was watching an up-and-coming blues band just in a club in London, and he thought they were great, kind of befriended them. And he called Dick Rowe at Decca, the guy who had passed on the Beatles, and told him, I just saw a band, you might be interested in them. They're called the Rolling Stones. And this time, Rowe locked him down. He didn't pass on them, redeeming himself just a little bit. And still, though, this story ranks as one of the all-time most painful missed opportunities. I mean, can you imagine having to live with that you were the one who passed on the Beatles? And although Beatles fans have often wondered what we would have missed out on had they signed with Decca and never met George Martin, who influenced their music so much. And of course, we probably all have these stories of missed opportunities that when we think of them, we get this pang of regret. Anybody? Yeah. Or at least we ask ourselves what might have been had we taken the risk or acted with some kind of intuition or acted on just an internal nudge. And philosophers and theologians have taken different approaches for how to deal with missed opportunities or this feeling of regret. Kierkegaard once famously advised a friend about getting married. What he told him was, my friendly advice is this: do it or do not do it. You will regret both. That's what he said. Jean-Paul Sartre said, regret is a form of bad faith, an attempt to deny the absolute freedom we have in making choices. He said, just make your choices. Don't look back. It's part of being free. Samuel Beckett, the playwright, said, my mistakes are my life. Our missed opportunities, our regrets even, they've made us who we are. C.S. Lewis talked about this in The Four Loves. He said, regret stems from the fear of being hurt, he thinks. We miss opportunity because we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to open ourselves to criticism. And he says, this is where the real danger lies, because the pain of missed opportunities can cause us to play it safe in everything, including our relationships. Lewis wrote, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The fate worse than the broken heart for Lewis is the unbreakable heart. Self-protection leads to isolation, and this does damage to us as human beings. Avoiding risk in love and relationships may prevent some pain up front, but it leads to a deeper pain when the heart becomes a heart of stone, not of flesh. And this will end up being the greatest regret of all. I mean, what if the opposite of regret is actually just the courage to risk loving, to risk trying, even though we might get hurt? Our text for today took place in this little town called Bethany, just outside Jerusalem, at the house of Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha. They were followers of Jesus and supporters of his ministry. More than that, they were friends with him. He was with them a lot. John says that Jesus loved them dearly. A few days earlier, Jesus had been out in the wilderness across the Jordan River, and he's essentially trying to avoid crowds because there was a price on his head. But he was told that Lazarus, his friend, was gravely ill, and so he left for Bethany, knowing that if he went, he would likely be arrested, and that he was, even if he left now, was probably too late to save his friend. And he was. By the time he got there, Lazarus had been dead for days. And Jesus stood in front of the tomb, weeping for his friend. And then he called him forth from the tomb, and Lazarus came out wrapped in burial cloths, kind of looking like a mummy. And it was a miracle for Lazarus, for Mary and Martha, but it didn't help things for Jesus in terms of him being a wanted man. It was a tremendous embarrassment for the Sadducees, kind of the ruling class there. Their distinctive teaching was there is no life after death. But here was Lazarus, fresh back from somewhere, It kind of undermined their teachings. And in fact, the Jewish council, we're told, met in response to Lazarus' raising and decided killing Jesus was enough. They needed to kill Lazarus as well. So the smart play at this moment was for Jesus to disappear for a while. Let's head back up to Galilee, just skip the Passover. But instead, he said, I'm headed for Jerusalem and toward a big confrontation. And the only ones who seemed to get this were his close friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And they took him in and just kind of shut out the world for a night. Although John tells the story in such a way that Lazarus' presence is just this kind of constant reminder that Jesus' big confrontation is actually a confrontation with death itself. He's going to challenge death as a power that looms over human life and makes people fearful or risk avoidant, a little less alive, a little less able to love. And on his way to this confrontation, his friends host him at dinner as just this sign of love and support. A meal like this in those days would have followed a very strict and familiar social structure. The guests would have entered, sat on little stools. There'd be some wash basins on the floor, and they would take turns washing their own grimy feet. Back then they didn't shower every day, so their feet had to be constantly washed. And this is what would keep the room in this meal from getting all stinky. And they had done this thousands of times. And then they would recline on benches, leaning on pillows toward a short table in the center, with their feet sticking out behind them, away from the food. They'd lean in on their left hand and reach them with their right to share in this common dish. And the men would recline and eat, and the women would serve. Those were the roles. But Mary totally breaks protocol here. And you have to kind of remember what Mary and Martha had been going through the past few days. When their brother became gravely ill, this was an existential crisis for them. You do not want to be an unmarried woman in the ancient world without a male heir taking care of them. Women couldn't even own property. If Lazarus died, some relative or even just a man from their town would have taken control of everything. They would have lost much more than a brother if Lazarus died, which he did. Jesus was clear across the Jordan, avoiding authorities. Coming back to Bethany would almost surely mean his arrest. He was, in essence, trading his life for a friend. And yet this is what he did in raising Lazarus. And he made himself incredibly vulnerable in this. Can you imagine the kind of gratitude Mary was feeling for Jesus? I like to picture her in the room, just kind of watching him throughout the evening, partly thinking, you need to get out of here. Like, you should run in the night right now. And partly thinking, if you're going through with this and you're going to have this confrontation with the powers, then this is probably the last time I ever get to see you. And the least I can do is properly honor you. And so we're told she takes this jar of perfumed oils, she knelt at Jesus' feet and opened the jar. She didn't make a big speech or a scene. She didn't announce her intentions. She just opened this jar of oils. And as soon as she did, the aroma would have begun to fill the room. Everyone would have stopped. And then all of them watching her, looking at her, Mary did several shocking and scandalous things. For one thing, she let her hair down in a room full of men. Honorable women were never seen with their hair down in their culture by anyone except their husbands. And this was kind of considered lewd behavior, at least overly familiar. Then she used this really expensive oil to anoint his feet. We're told the price of it too, 300 denarii. The reason I think we're given that is that's, in those days, this was the average yearly salary of a typical worker. Third, she touched the feet of an unmarried man in front of everybody. In the ancient world, single women did not even touch single men, much less touch their feet. So massaging perfumed oils into his bare feet. This was scandalous. And then finally, she wiped the excess oil off with her own hair. And this is actually inexplicable. There's no cultural reason for this. There's no other record of something like this, even just in the general historical record. It's just a genuinely unique event. The story appears in all four Gospels. Each time it's just a little bit different. Like Matthew and Mark, it takes place in Bethany, but at the house of Simon the leper. And it's with a nameless woman, not Mary, who anoints his head. In Matthew, the objection comes from all the disciples, not just Judas. In Mark, it only says some objected, we don't know who. And in Luke, it happens at a Pharisee's house. And it happens much earlier in Jesus' life. And the woman here is called a notorious sinner, and she weeps the whole time, if you remember that story. And her tears and the oils wash his feet. And the objection that time comes from Simon the Pharisee. But here in John, it's this longtime friend, a follower of Jesus, whose brother Jesus had just raised from the dead. But in all the tellings, it's portrayed as this extravagant, kind of spontaneous gesture of love and adoration that is costly in really more ways than one. She anointed his feet with so much of this valuable oil. She had to mop up the extra with her own hair, and the whole scene is kind of scandalous and over the top. And Judas, in John at least, it's like he basically is just saying what everybody's already thinking. Like, why didn't you just sell this and give it to the poor? You get a lot for that stuff. And in the text, there's this gloss that Judas just wanted the money so he could pilfer it. And so there's this contrast in John between the extravagance of Mary and the stinginess of Judas. Mary's just like expressing her love and gratitude despite the risk. And Judas, who has, in C.S. Lewis's words, who has locked up his heart in a casket or coffin, has a different reaction. And the contrast, I think, that moves me most involves an observation several scholars have made about Mary's actions. It's that in their culture, the first time a woman would let her hair down in front of a man would have been on her wedding night. Not that Mary intended to marry Jesus. It was more like she was pledging fidelity to him. It wasn't a sexual thing. She was just saying, I'm all in. Like, I'm holding nothing back here. She just kind of lost herself in this moment of gratitude for what he had done in saving her by saving her brother. And in anticipation of the death she seemed to know he was about to face, she just lavishly pours out a jar of perfume, washing his feet and wiping it with her hair. And then, of course, the grumbling starts. She gets criticized. I think part of what this text asks us to do is to think about what a missed opportunity this could have been had Mary worried about all of that grumbling. She knew she was breaking social norms. She knew people would critique her for that, but she just went for it. It was kind of over the top. And so it makes me wonder what this might teach us, not just about our relationship to God, but our relationship with each other, our family and friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, the excluded. You know, we get so distracted with the busyness of life. We get so consumed with our own safety, our self-image, how we look, a fear of being hurt, that we can often very easily isolate ourselves and self-protect and stop taking chances and make our hearts unbreakable, impenetrable. What a price we pay for making that move, you know? And not just us, but what a price our loved ones pay as well. What a price the vulnerable and excluded also pay. I mean, Jesus taught that God is always present in the lives of the hungry and sick, the homeless, the unemployed, the immigrant. When we fail to lavish them with love and friendship and acceptance, we miss the opportunity to lavish God with those things. God comes to us each day disguised as a spouse, a child, a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, in the faces of the marginalized. And so it's good, I think, to read this story and ask ourselves, what is it that holds us back from just loving them recklessly? I mean, do you think Mary was ever sorry for what she'd done once Jesus was gone? Do you think she regretted her actions or just wished she had the cash? There's a great story about a man. I've told it before. I just love this story. His name was Morton F. Plant. He was a wealthy New York City railroad magnate. This is like early 19-teens. And Plant had made his money the old-fashioned way. He inherited all of it from his father, who was a robber baron. But Morton was more of a lover than a robber, and he became this huge philanthropist. And he was happily married with this big family, a ton of kids. And then his wife died suddenly after 26 years of marriage. And he was wrecked and just thought he would never love again. And then he met this woman named May and fell head over heels. And they were married and were living in New York City. And every day, he and May spent much of the day together, taking walks around the city. They had this habit of strolling by the Cartier jeweler's shop and looking at the display window. And May kept admiring these two pearl necklaces that were on display in the window. They were at that time, these two necklaces together were worth $1 million. That'd be like $20 million in today's money. And May had grown up poor. She wasn't used to being rich. And so as a surprise, her husband, Mr. Plant, went to Cartier and he traded his Fifth Avenue mansion for these pearl necklaces. And he kind of thought of it as a real estate transaction and a good investment. Pearls were going up in price. And so he thought he could make his new bride happy and maybe turn a profit. And Cartier got this great location for a building, which became their North American headquarters. It's still there to this day. And everybody was happy until this Japanese man figured out how to culture pearls, and the pearl market crashed. And so today, the Cartier building is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it's on Fifth Avenue. And Mrs. Plant's pearls sold for a mere $150,000 upon her death in 1956. And you'll hear this story told once in a while, usually as like an epic fail. This guy trading his Fifth Avenue mansion for pearls that immediately went bust. But I think they have it all wrong. I bet every time he walked by that Cartier building, Morton Plant reminded his wife of the extravagant gift. I bet he told her, I wouldn't sell those pearls for $200 million if you feel loved, if you enjoy wearing them, if they make you happy. I don't think he regretted it in the least. I don't think Mary regretted what she did in just lavishly expressing her love and devotion to Christ. Now, I have some regrets in my life, but never have I regretted telling someone I love and care for how much they mean to me. Never have I regretted just sharing lavishly with somebody who's struggling, or just being there for a friend in a time of need. When Judas voices his objection, what he expects, I think, is for everyone else to agree. And Jesus comes to Mary's defense. Let her alone, he says. She is anticipating and honoring the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you. You don't always have me. He's saying you can always lavish your good gifts upon the poor, and you should. But Mary had one shot to honor Jesus before his epic battle with death, and she took it. and in less than a week, he'd be dead. Scholars tell us that it's the oils that she used were likely the ones that were left over from her brother's burial rites. They go and anoint the body each day. But her brother, now back from the dead, he wouldn't need these oils. Jesus did. And you can kind of feel the heaviness of death hanging over that dinner. And then comes Mary with her oil from the burial rites. They all knew the smell. And she had this choice to make. She could anoint his head, which is how you anoint kings and prophets, or anoint his feet, which is what you did to a corpse. Symbolically, it was kind of this way of saying, this man is as good as dead, and we all know it. And Jesus seems to have made this connection, and he ratifies it, he supports it, he agreed with it. Mary's act, in essence, wasn't just loving, it was actually prophetic. Jesus told the others to let her actions speak, let them stand. Barbara Brown Taylor said it this way. She said, "There will be nothing economical about this man's death, just as there has been nothing economical about his life. In him, the extravagance of God's love is made flesh. In him, the excessiveness of God's mercy is made manifest." Mary's devotion isn't cool. It's not reasonable. It's not like sensible or economical, because God's love is not like those things. Her act of love is extravagant and excessive and way over the top, because God's love and God's mercy is extravagant and excessive and way over the top. And just as she poured out the precious oil onto Jesus' feet to anoint him for burial, so he would pour out his own life as an offering for many. And we are meant to do the same for each other, as if we are doing so for Christ. Later on that week, Jesus would gather with his followers for the last time for another meal, the Passover meal this time. And John's gospel is different than the others. In John's gospel, they don't receive communion, the Eucharist. Instead, Jesus strips down to his waist, ties a towel around his hips, and takes a basin of water and washes all the disciples' feet. There's this connection to Mary and Bethany. And he tells them, once he's gone, to serve one another like this. Just a lavish friendship and hospitality and acceptance and love and affection. To share generously with those in need. Because every time you do, he said, God suddenly appears in the world. Whatever you do for the least of these, you're doing it to me. There's a writer and speaker, Brene Brown. She tells this great story about this Saturday morning when she and her teenage daughter ran to Nordstrom to pick up some makeup, and they just rolled out of bed. They didn't get dressed or put on makeup or brush their teeth. They just were going to pop in, pick up their order, and leave, but they got distracted by shoes, which I hear is a common thing that happens. And they're just looking around and goofing off and having fun, and suddenly Brene spotted what she called a pack of alpha moms who were with their daughters in the store, dressed to the nines. They live in Houston, so she's like, they're done up, like Texas done up. And her daughter didn't see him, but Brene Brown did, and was immediately kind of self-conscious about how she looked and what they were doing. And so she had spotted them, and she turns around and catches sight of this strange blur of jerky movement over in the direction of her daughter. And her daughter was over there doing the robot to the music in the store, just totally going for it. Didn't know anybody besides her mom was watching. And then her daughter looks over at her and sees her mom, and then sees the alpha moms behind her. And she just freezes with her mouth open. And Brown says the look on her face was like, oh no, Mom, like, what do I do? And her mom knew in that moment, like, there's so much riding on the reaction there. She was already feeling judged, but her daughter, was just hanging there, so vulnerable. And she says, thank God, she made one of the best mom decisions of her life that she said kind of loud so the ladies behind her could hear her. Oh, you know what you need. You need to add the scarecrow to your moves, and just kind of does it like, just makes a fool of herself with her. And then they danced together in the shoe department of Nordstrom, practicing their moves till the song was over with no shame. And don't you just know that that little girl knew in that moment, like she didn't guess or think or wonder, she knew that her mom loved her. You see how much power lives in that one little choice. That's the power to change the life of a girl, the power to change the world. You think of the damage it would have done if she would have thrown her under the bus and got embarrassed or shamed her. It was a moment of glory that Mary, the sister of Lazarus, would have been proud of. And here's what I think. I think that moment of connection between the mother and the daughter, just acting a fool in Nordstrom's, not caring what anybody else think, I think what you call that is love. That's what you call it. It's just love. And you and I will probably never have a chance to sign the Beatles to a record deal, or not. We'll probably never get to trade our home to give a spouse a lavish birthday gift. But we face that same kind of choice all the time between playing it safe and being reasonable and sensible and economical, or having the courage to love lavishly and generously, just to hold nothing back. And I think maybe it's a profound act of worship and devotion to God to do the scarecrow with your daughter in the middle of Nordstrom's while the alpha moms are watching. And we have these opportunities every single day to take a risk, to say, I love you, to chase a dream, to give a gift, to pull the car over and help someone, to check in on a neighbor, to make the call or send the text, to send the flowers, to say the unsaid thing. I love you. I'm proud of you. I admire you. I appreciate you. And I swear that those things beat back the darkness of the world every time we say them. Mary loses herself in the moment. She just goes for it to honor her friend Jesus. And the truth is, I wish I could live more like that, taking risks and pouring out my life and telling people how I feel about them. And to risk getting hurt, being criticized, looking silly, so I can live a life that is really alive. So people who matter to me don't have to guess about what they mean to me. I mean, think about this. Mary just holds nothing back. She gets a lot of trouble in the moment. And yet, 2,000 years later, we're still telling her story. That's the power of this. It's really quite beautiful when you think about it. And here's the thing. This life is available to all of us, but you gotta want it to have it. You gotta want it enough to really go for it and take a risk. But that life is here for us, for all of us, if we'll dare to do what C.S. Lewis would have called, like, live with breakable hearts. I was laughing with Taylor Johnson about this 6 years ago. So we do 3-year cycles. 6 years ago, we were doing this story. And I shared one of my big personal regrets was this one time when I was at grandma's house when I was little. I was maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And it was like Easter dinner, I think. And I picked up one of the pies she had made and acted like I was going to throw it in my uncle's face. And my uncle, he was the crazy uncle, Jim. He started going, do it. Do it. And I was like, really? He's like, do it. And it got louder and louder. He's finally screaming, do it, throw it, throw it. And I chickened out. I put the pie down because I thought I'd get in trouble. And then I asked my dad, would I be in trouble? He's like, no, he was telling you to do it. And I was just filled with regret, right? So then we do the sermon, And in the benediction, Taylor Johnson comes up. And he had heard that story and left, got in his car, drove to the grocery store, came back with a pie and handed it to me to throw a pie in his face in the benediction. And so I got to do it, and it was glorious. It was everything I dreamed that it would be. This is what I'm talking about. As we move through our days, as we're passing by one another at home and at work, in our family, our friendships, our neighbors, as we're driving around the city, everyone we see, everyone we meet, you guys, is fighting such a hard battle with their lives. And they are so armored up to not get hurt. And Christians are supposed to be the ones who walk around piercing the armor with love and just extravagant kind of evidence of life. And this is a powerful thing. This is the thing that has enough power really to change the world, to change our systems, to change our politics even, and the very meaning of our life. My prayer is that this story will stick with us and make us brave and give us courage. Not unbreakable hearts, but hearts that can be broken, but are truly alive. Let's pray. Oh God, we do thank you for Mary and her extravagant gift. For Jesus who set his eyes on Jerusalem and the goal of facing down death. And I pray that we will hold these two things together. That loving extravagantly is facing down death. Help us to be brave and have courage to tell those around us, to show them how much they mean to us, to say the thing we're afraid to say, to send the text, to make the call. We thank you so much for this story. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Will you stand, please? And we're going to receive communion.